welcome. My name is Dave Wool. I'm a senior manager in our higher education consulting practice with 20 years of experience. I'm excited to host and facilitate today's podcast with two great guests that bring experience, knowledge, and valuable insights. Today we have Dr. Alton Austin, a leader and innovator with experience in enrollment management, student affairs, and student success. He brings experience working in both student life and academics at large public universities, as well as enrollment management at small and mid-sized state colleges. In addition, Alton had previous careers in corporate IT and the U.S. Air Force. Thank you for your service, Alton. As well, we have Dr. Joe Traino, an experienced higher education consultant and leader. He has held a variety of IT positions over his career and has been a CIO for multiple higher ed institutions. He's been in the technology field for over 30 years now, with 20 years of experience in higher education. He's been a teacher, he's served as adjunct faculty, and has served in leadership roles within the private and public sectors. So thank you, both Joe and Alton, for joining. And just to summarize in this podcast, we'll compare the leadership culture in higher education to both the corporate sector and the military. We'll discuss how higher ed leaders sometimes think they act differently than others. But in actuality, there may be more similarities than we think across these disparate industries with distinct cultures. And with that, let's get into it. So, my first question to our guests: how do institutional politics inhibit the effectiveness of the institution? And I'm going to turn to Alton first for his comments.
So institutions of higher education have a reputation for being silent. It's not an accident, but at the same time, it's not intentional. Money and turf are fought over in a zero-sum game. If you get more, I get less. And if I get less, I don't want you to get more. And this translates from the top to the bottom, and it includes budgets, salaries, and even office space. It also applies to work effort. If anyone finds out they can get your help, they will take it to full advantage. I've often seen times where it becomes necessary to let someone fail in order to help them find the means to do their own work. Now, it's not all bad. You have to have your circle of trust. No person is an island, and no silo can stand with only one person in it.
I like that response, Alton, and I would agree with you. I would also add on the flip side of that, what we've seen in higher ed is shared governance, and I use air quotes for shared, where there's just a tremendous amount of stifle or crippling analysis that really is focused more on trying to develop a decision by a committee, leading by committee, or managing by committee. And in that case, many times we see these committees across higher ed really struggle to make decisions because they're trying to arrive at a consensus that's very difficult. You have very opinionated groups, whether it's faculty or administrators, you might have conflict. And so trying to get decisions made through a shared governance process can be a challenge for a lot of institutions. And it creates a lack of sense of urgency, or it really creates a lag in decision making, and a lot of times these decisions have to be made quickly. If you compare that to maybe the military or private organizations, you have more of a opposite approach, maybe more of a command and control style of management, where decisions are made according to a hierarchy. And in that case, those decisions are made swiftly, and people get in line, and they make the changes that are supported by the decisions that are made higher up. So it's a very clear and distinct decision-making process. And, I think we don't see a lot of that in higher ed. Maybe some organizations do, but it's not something that you see a lot of.
So thanks, Joe. And Alton, back to you before we leave this first topic. Given that you've worked in these what appear to be very disparate industries, higher education, military, do you want to just kind of close the this discussion on this question and kind of compare those two directly with your thoughts from your direct experience in both industries?
Sure. So, it's funny when you think about the military, because the military is designed to be decisive in nature. If you're going into battle, or even if it's just a training exercise where you're pretending to be in battle, there's a hierarchy, and different people have different decision-making responsibilities for the actions that take place in that environment. And that usually works, I won't say flawlessly, because accidents happen, things go wrong, but it happens, and that's usually the result of a bad decision rather than not having a decision made. But when you get back to the office culture that exists in the military, the same things go on that go on in higher ed and elsewhere. Oh, I can't give up that office space. I might need it for somebody else. So I'll turn it into a storeroom before I'll let this other unit take that space or that vehicle. It's amazing how that goes on, because nobody wants to give up their piece of the pie. It's it's funny. And the other part of that I've seen is that a lot of times people won't make a decision, not because they don't know the right decision, but because they don't want the accountability that comes with making the decision. They'd rather wait and let somebody else make the decision, good or bad, beneficial or not, to avoid being criticized for making a bad decision.
Hmm.
It's it's striking when you watch it from an objective lens
Hmm.
that we get as a consultant.
So that's a nice segue maybe into the next question here that we have for the both of you, and we're going to start with Joe on this one. But why do some people get stuck in certain disciplines? Again, coming from both of your respective experiences, Joe.
Yeah, I would say there's likely two scenarios that play out, and I'll talk about the first one. That is, I think people um, get very comfortable and get comfortable in a particular discipline or a role, and I think change is very difficult for people, and so it's just easier to stay in that particular role. The second scenario, I think, and I think Alton will speak a little bit more about this, is people get stuck in a given role based on the perception of them in that role in their organization. So it's very hard to move into a different role or a promoted role because they're viewed as a particular individual in a given role. So I think sometimes people have to leave an institution and then maybe come back a few years later with some more experience, or maybe viewed differently because they had a different role outside of their institution.
Yeah. Okay. Alton, your thoughts?
Too often, and this is going to sound funny, but people are only viewed as how they've been observed.
Yeah.
If I've only seen you be an assistant, I don't see you as a manager. If I've never seen you do things like a manager, why would I expect you to be a manager? If I see you, in a sanitation role, whether it's, riding the back of a garbage truck or, mopping the floors of the office, I'm probably not going to be able to imagine you as a neurosurgeon doing surgery. And so, and that's as much my fault as it is anything else, because we get stuck on those roles in which we see people. But, comfort's the first answer. We get comfortable knowing people in those roles, and it challenges our space to learn that they can do something else. Because if that guy riding the back of the garbage truck is actually in med school, and I know that's very far-fetched, but if that's what he is, if he can make that kind of change, why can't I? And and that scares people, because they want to believe they can do anything anybody else can do, which leads into threat. If you can do something more than what I think you can do, you may be a threat to my success, because now you might compete with me for something I want. And that's a problem for me. I can't, I don't want to compete. I want what's supposed to be mine, and you just go get yours, but don't take mine to get yours. And then the bigger problem in my book is that shiny object. when you've been at an institution or a company or whatever, and you've been doing really well, you've been, doing all the things you're supposed to do to grow, but a new position comes up and you want that position, and the boss says, well, but I need somebody with new ideas, and you're going to bring me the same ideas that we've always had. You're completely discounting what that person might have to offer. And that is unfortunate. And why we see in higher ed, the phrase is, if you want to move up, you got to move out. People don't expect you to be able to move up because they see you where you are. I know people that have been registrars for 20 years. And I ask them, why did you want to be a registrar for 20 years? Well, I didn't. But every time I try to get promoted, they said, you're a really good registrar. I don't see you as a dean or a VP. I want you to keep being my registrar. And they don't want to move. They don't want to change institutions. People get place bound. And so you get stuck.
I guess to both of you, before we move on to the next question, then thinking about higher ed, and since we're using that as a juxtaposition against military or corporate cultures, obviously the military is a huge organization, so there's always, and there's this very strict hierarchy, but there is typically, right, room to move up, and then corporations, depending on size, also. Is it the size of higher ed institutions typically, or organizations, that limit the ability to move up, or is that part of the problem, or is it really more about what you're saying? It's just a culture that people just get stuck.
It's both.
Okay.
I worked at, one of the largest four-year public institutions in the nation as far as student headcount goes. And I got stuck there because I was an unknown quantity outside of my space, and it was very hard to move up. So I moved out. I've also worked in very small institutions where the only person between me and the president was the VP, and there was no ability to climb a ladder, if you will, because it was a very short ladder. Somebody had to move out for me to move up.
Yeah.
And so it's both to me.
Yeah.
It depends. The real answer is it depends.
Great. Joe, anything to add before we move on?
I think Alton summed it up really well there.
Okay.
I think we can move on to the next question.
All right. Well, our next topic is about leadership and kind of building leaders. And it's a two-parter. It's kind of an interesting question. Why are some leaders better than others? And the answer to that may be another question. Why are some leaders more visible? But with that said, Alton, start us off with your perspective on why are some leaders better than others?
Because they care. I think that's one of the primary drivers in being a good leader is that you care. You care about your team, you care about your mission. And so if you care, you're seen. You're not hiding in an office in the corner of the C-suite. You're out. You're taking the time to talk to people, to survey the environment, and hear what's being said, good and bad. Leaders that hide, they don't want to hear the bad stuff that they might be responsible for, or that they could have changed and didn't. Those same leaders, they encourage those teams. They give them the freedom to fail, and they hold them accountable for meeting their goals, even if they don't meet their goals. But they encourage them, and they give them the tools and the resources needed to meet their goals. And that's one of the biggest differences. But in the end, good leaders get their hands dirty. They jump in and help. They're right there on the front line with everybody else. And I'm not talking about just CEOs. I'm talking about first level managers. When the admissions office gets overwhelmed, if you're the director of admissions and you don't go out and start seeing students and helping out, your team's going to see that you're not one of them, that you don't care about them. You're just there.
Yeah, I agree, Alton, and I would also add that I think good leaders are very passionate about their work, about the organization that they're working for, whether it's an institution or another organization, and they really care. I think good leaders are strong people managers, so they know how to motivate their team. They're supportive. They give their staff opportunities for growth. I think strong leaders also are more visible due to strong communication skills, are actively engaging, and maybe, working with other areas of the organization on a volunteer basis. If there's committees and they volunteer, they're seen more, they're more visible, they're actively engaged.
And, one of the things you said, I think you said it, Alton, was about failure. And failure is such a powerful teacher. I think we've all understood that over the years. We've been around long enough to know that it is important. I mean, this has been a tried and true method with a large software company that dominates the Office product suite that we won't name, but they've used failure in their marketing strategy, and that's a well-known fact over in the years. And failure does not mean you can't be successful. In fact, if you don't fail at some point, it's almost impossible for you to proceed at certain times because of the learning, the impactfulness of the learning that comes from those failures. So, so I think
That's why they say fail fast, right?
Yeah.
So you can learn and move on and grow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, Dave.
And you have to have that culture or that environment of safe. There's a safety net that still allows for a failure without it being catastrophic, perhaps, that allows individuals to know that they have the ability. You're not developing a culture of failure. In fact, just the opposite. You're acknowledging failure does sometimes happen, and you learn from it and you move on.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. If you look back in your past, recent, long-term, doesn't really matter, and you point to something and you can and you say, well, I failed. What you really said was you didn't try again. You didn't try harder. I have a PhD, but it wasn't the first PhD program I started.
Yeah.
The first one didn't work. I wasn't a good fit for me, and I left and I went and did something different. I tried again and was successful.
Great. I mean, that's valuable insights, gentlemen. And as we conclude here with the last formal question before we wrap up, to both of you, the question is, what top 3 considerations do you have for higher ed leaders?
Well, I can go first. I think higher ed leaders really need to have the best interests of the institution in mind, from both I think, reputational standpoint as well as organizational standpoint. And what I mean by that is really looking out for the best interests of the institution, whether it's accreditation, the value that the institution is providing to students, good quality education, teaching and learning, but also really being more inwardly focused on your people and making sure that they have the opportunities to grow and to really provide a great service to the students. I think inspiring and motivating your staff, I think, is part of that. I think having everybody really focused on the student experience, I think, is a top consideration from my standpoint.
That's great. Alton?
For me, it's leading and staying involved. And you don't have to have a position of authority to lead. Everybody can take a leadership role in whatever it is that they do. And if you do that, you're going to be seen as a leader no matter what level of position you're in. And it's going to give you opportunities to advance. Know your people, motivate your staff, just be engaged, be seen, and demonstrate that you care. And sometimes to demonstrate that you care, you have to tell people hard truths.
Yep.
So as we wrap up here, I want to kind of think about some of these takeaways, and I think we did it. You all, both of you, Joe and Alton, did a nice job of um, bringing up these recurring themes. One we talked about pretty at length here. Don't be afraid to fail. And again, that comes from a culture or an environment where there is a uh, willingness to allow people to, you know, seek discomfort a little bit. You know, my
Mhm.
son even has a T-shirt that says that or something. I used to go, "What is that?" But okay, I get it now. You know, I mean, be able to push the limits a little bit. You know, get out of that comfort zone once in a while. Be engaged, right? As leaders, be engagement is so important because it tells your team members and your employees that you care, which is one of the
Mhm.
other points I know you brought up, Alton. But by being engaged, they know that you're in the game. You're not just going through the motions. And then finally, I think the idea that there's a understanding that not everything's rosy. But if you have that engagement when there's not so great things that you have to tell somebody, my experience is they're a lot more willing to accept constructive feedback if they know it's coming from a place of caring
Mhm.
and um, intentionality and thoughtfulness, right? And I think I'm hearing that, and those things are core to any good culture, regardless of the military, corporate environment, higher education, or elsewhere. Would you both agree?
Absolutely. I mean, you just described radical candor, and I don't want to, turn this into a commercial for the former, CEO of
That's a good book.
major corporation, but radical candor means something. I practice it on a regular basis to help people grow and let them know that I
Yeah.
care.
Yeah. I think that's really key. Giving people opportunities to grow and getting them excited about what they do. I think whether it's the military, whether it's higher ed or a private, it's all about the people and they do the work and getting them really in a place where they're excited about what they do. I think, really, really makes a big difference, makes a positive difference to your customers or clients or students or, whatever you're serving. So.
Well, I think that's going to be a wrap, gentlemen, and I'll just say a few words here. First of all, thank you both for your radical candor, and the listeners get a bonus opportunity to check out a book if they haven't checked that one out before. I want to formally say thank you to both Alton and Joe for your insights and feedback and sharing your experience. And to our listeners, I hope you have enjoyed this candid discussion. And with that, I ask all of you to be well and take care.